Welcome to the July edition of the Backstage Community Sessions. I think we skipped June and we plan to skip August as well, but we have this little update in the middle of the summer to have something to give you all an update. So diving into the agenda, today we have a couple of release highlights. Going to talk about some SIG updates that we've had. We will have some people from Radius demoing, showcasing, and talking about their Backstage and Radius integration. And then lastly, as always, we'll have a bit of time for QA at the end if there are any questions. Right, so diving into the release highlights, yesterday we released 1.29. Bit of a summer release, nothing huge in there, but there's some exciting stuff. First off, we have deprecations for the backend system. We are getting ready to release the 1.0 version of the backend system and have deprecated a bunch of things, and same thing as the release before. There's a couple of there are fewer deprecations this time around than last time. Either way, in the release notes you can find all the information about that. So it's in the backend system and the permission policy as well. If you're using a custom permission policy, there have been some minor updates that you will want to pay attention to. We have also now shipped a built-in health check endpoint. There's a liveliness probe and a readiness probe endpoint that you can use, which replaces the old status checker in the old backend system. So we've closed that gap in the new backend system. We also have the catalog logs module. So a little while ago, we released a change where the catalog no longer logs errors by default, but they are instead emitted as events. It's a bit confusing, especially when you get set up early on with Backstage. So we now have a catalog logs module that will subscribe to these events and log them to the console. And this is installed by default when you create a new Backstage project as well. And then we have the GitHub provider has support for repository events. So you can get updates from GitHub when repositories changes. So if a repository is archived, for example, that can be removed from your discovery in an event-driven way. And lastly, internationalization for the catalog I want to call out as well. So you can now customize all of the messaging in the catalog, all of the text strings throughout the plugin, as well as, of course, provide translation to other languages if you want to do that. Right, that's it for the release highlights. Now, SIG update. Fairly small change. We've renamed the catalog SIG to Framework SIG. And we've, of course, expanded the scope with that. We've recently reshuffled the ownership of the catalog to fall to the core maintainers. And we also felt that we wanted a good place to just discuss more deeper questions about the Backstage framework, which is why we made this change. It fills the same time slot, so it's on this Thursdays here. I'm pretty sure it's Tuesdays. I think this is wrong and wrong in the, you know what, I'll go get this updated afterwards if that's the case. But I'm pretty sure it's Tuesdays bi-weekly at 4 o'clock Stockholm time. There's we've changed the format a little bit, so we do the usual agenda topics in the SIG meeting, but we also fill out the rest of the meeting usually with PR reviews. So if you have a PR to the Backstage core that you kind of want to talk about in a meeting, this is a great place to put your PR down for review ahead of the meeting or in the meeting, and then join the Framework SIG to talk about it, and we can walk through it together. All right, and that's it for the updates. From our side, do we have Ryan and Will from Radius? Are you ready to present?
Yes, let me get the presentation up and then I'll share my screen. Give me 1 second. Oh, it looks like I have to request permission. Okay, perfect.
I'm hoping that someone is helping me with this.
Yeah, I fixed it.
Thank you. Does Ryan need permission as well, or just you?
Just me, I think would be good. I don't know, Ryan, do you need permission to share?
No, you just keep the slides up, and I'll have you do it for me.
That sounds great.
Excellent.
Okay, well, if can you see my slides? Perfect. Okay. So, hey, Backstage community, thanks for letting us join and talk a little bit about Radius and how we leverage Backstage to build our dashboard. With me, I have Ryan Nowak, who's the principal architect and creator of Backstage Radius, and then also Reshma, who is a fellow product manager on the team, and I'm Will. I'm also a product manager on the Radius team and one of the maintainers. So just a quick overview. We'll drive a real quick agenda, give a really brief overview of Radius, and with a particular focus on how we use Backstage to create our dashboard. I'll give a quick demo of the Radius dashboard, and then Ryan will go into the architecture and design and talk a little bit about our journey through using Backstage and leveraging it as the framework for our dashboard. And then I'll talk a little bit at the end about some of the future work and perhaps seed some ideas for further collaboration with the Backstage community in the future.
Sorry for jumping in. I just want to double check if people can see the screen. I realized I was still sharing. I've stopped it. Are people able to see what you're sharing? I cannot.
You cannot. Okay.
1 second. I think I have a thing that I can fix this. There we go. Does that fix it?
I think that's just large video, so maybe resharing will help.
Okay. Yeah. Let me reshare. Give me 1 second.
I think it might have just been you, Patrick. I'm not sure. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. If it might just be me because I was sharing. Okay. I'm good now as well.
Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption.
Okay. So everybody can see the screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Anyway, so just introduce the agenda. So now I'll just dive in real quick to talk a little bit about what Radius is and give you a very, very high-level overview. And we'll zoom in on the dashboard, which is the main focus of today's meeting. So Radius, in a nutshell, is a cloud-native application platform that works on any cloud. We're part of the CNCF. We just got accepted into Sandbox as a Sandbox project in April. And at a very high level, Radius, I'll talk a little bit about the 4 main goals that we sought out to accomplish when we were creating Radius. We think about the world in terms of we think about the world in very application-centric terms. And Radius is a platform that is very much involved in the deployment and the provision of resources for your application. So the 4 goals that we tried to kind of solve with Radius is improving team collaboration, so leveraging the application development model and introducing applications and configurable environments to allow for better team collaboration and separation of concerns between developers and operators so that they can each focus on areas that they're most familiar with and be able to collaborate effectively to deliver an application. One of the key things that we've also introduced is infrastructure recipes. These are swappable infrastructure that can be predefined using popular infrastructure as code tools. So if you predefine these and get them to follow org best practices and IT policies by default, you sort of take the cognitive burden away from developers and allow them to focus on developing the application. So again, it goes back to the team collaboration and separation of concerns core principle, and that's everybody is able to focus on what they're best at, and Radius does all the heavy lifting behind the scenes to coordinate everything. And I'll jump to the next goal. We want to be cloud neutral, being able to deploy across on-prem and cloud environments with a consistent experience, which means developers actually don't have to change anything to be able to deploy the same application across platforms and clouds. And then application graph is something that we've also introduced into the application model with Radius. So within Radius, you can define how resources and containers and things like that are connected to each other. And by defining those, you not only enable the deployment of those, at deploy time, Radius is able to read those connections that you've defined and do all the necessary things like setting environment variables, etc., to connect those resources together. And then by virtue of that, we now have generated some data around the application graph. And this is the thing that we want to kind of highlight in today's call to showcase in the Radius dashboard. We leverage Backstage to provide a dashboard for the user to visualize this application graph. So this will be the main focus of today's discussion. So with that, I wanted to zoom in on the dashboard a bit and give a little bit of background on why we built the dashboard. With Radius, we introduced a bunch of new concepts. So for example, application-centric resources and environments and connections between resources. So we wanted to give users a graphical UI to be able to visualize all these things that we've introduced, in addition to the text-based console. Because prior to our dashboard, we only had some console-based UI where you can say, show me the app graph, and then we kind of do our best to list out all the resources and show you in text what is connected to what. But we really wanted to give a graphical UI for the user to be able to interact with their deployed application. So the application is a standalone dashboard that gets installed when you initialize Radius, and this dashboard is actually an instance of Backstage. We built it completely on Backstage to take advantage of all the extensibility, customization, and the Backstage ecosystem that will hopefully allow us to grow this the functionality of the dashboard going forward. And we really think that our users overlap quite a bit with Backstage users in terms of the use of the dashboard. We think that Radius, we envision Radius to be used alongside Backstage in many scenarios. And we did some really rough user research. We polled our community in Discord. Sample size isn't huge, but we see some clear trends in the responses that we got. We see that Backstage or 7 out of 8 respondents currently use or are looking to use a developer dashboard or a portal. And out of those 7, 4 are leveraging Backstage. So there's a lot of there's quite a bit of desire, and this isn't representative of all the feedback that we've got over the months, but this is kind of just a snapshot sample, but we do have a lot of desire from our community to see kind of Radius dashboard evolve and grow to be able to leverage other aspects of the visualization to help with managing their applications. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future work slide that we'll show at the end. So with that, I'm going to go do a quick demo of the Radius dashboard. So bear with me here while I switch up my screen. All right, let me get the right screen up on here. All right, is everybody able to see a VS Code screen? Okay, perfect. All right, I'll zoom in here to make it easier on the eyes. But what I want to show you here is a very simple demo. And I'll start with deploying an application with Radius. So what I'll deploy is our just the Radius like getting started demo app. It's a very simple like to-do list type of application where you have a front end, a container hosting a front end, and then that front end is connected to a database that stores all the to-do items that the user enters in through the front end portal. So the core of a Radius application is the application definition, which I'm showing you here. It's this app.bicep file. So you define the application in terms of its containers. So here we have the front end container, which leverages this image that we've published to GHCR. And then you'll notice the connections here. This is the connection that I was mentioning earlier, and this is in the app graph. This would be the edge connecting all the nodes in the application graph. So in here we have a connection to a database, and we've also defined a database here to be a data store, a Redis of the type Redis cache, and we've named it DB and use that name to connect to the core application container. So we'll deploy this right now. So this app.bicep is here in the root folder of this repo. So I can do a rad run app.bicep, and then what this will do is build the application from the definitions I've provided, and we'll deploy it into our local, because as a developer, I've just containerized this application and I'm about to test this locally using provisioning some resources on my local machine to kind of just take a look at it, right? So what rad run does is builds and deploys the application, and then it will also create a port forward, which it is automatically doing right now for me and jumping to it, but creating a port forward to the exposed port to allow us to interact with the application. So you'll see here the connection created all the environment variables necessary to connect to the Redis database. And then we can launch the application, and you can see you can add stuff in here, hello Backstage, and then it will populate. So nothing too fancy, just a very simple application to demo what's going on. I'll go back to VS Code and show you another port that's been forwarded. So what rad run also does is it port forwards to the dashboard, the Backstage-based dashboard that we have for Radius. So this is what we wanted to show mainly today, and this is the dashboard. So this is basically a skinned version of Backstage that's customized for Radius, and every time you install Radius, the dashboard gets installed on your cluster automatically by default. And then when you run your application, you can also run the dashboard and go look at what's been deployed. So you'll see here a couple of things. The landing page has some FYI information. And then at the bottom, you'll see all the applications that have been deployed. So right now I have 3 applications, and the one that I just deployed is Radius Demo. So we can take a look at this. We'll click into it, and you'll see here a couple things. We have an overview that tells you what the type it is, and then some details of this resource. So in this case, this is an application resource. So it's just an application definition that gets displayed here. You can click on resources to see what all resources are associated with this application resource. So in our case, it's just the demo container. This is the front end container, and then the database backing it. So the really cool thing that we really love and our community really loves is the app graph. So we've built, and Ryan will go into the details on how we built all this, but basically this is a Radius, it's built like a Radius plugin in Backstage, and we have these app graph visualizations that allow you to visualize your application graph, which you would have otherwise had to use the console to view. Totally zoomable, and this is one of the things we love about Backstage is it provided us with all the building blocks we needed to stand up this dashboard really quickly, and a lot of powerful features that could be added. And our community actually had contributed a bunch of features, and we're very, very happy with how Backstage provides a lot of these features and libraries out of the box. Like, for example, this Zoom button was added by a community member who had never done front-end development before, and they were very happy with the experience they got. So yeah, so a couple of other areas here are just, you click through, you can see all the recipes that are available. And I didn't talk about recipes a whole lot, but basically think about recipes as in Radius, the infrastructure as code kind of templates that your operations team would be able to pre-configure, and you can leverage to deploy your application resources. So in this case, you might have remember that I mentioned we have a Redis cache in our application. So I leveraged this recipe that was predefined for me, and all the configurations were available for me to deploy. And all I needed to do was state that I wanted a Redis cache, and then Radius knows to grab the recipe in my particular environment. So aside from that, I also wanted to run through something else real quick and deploy this application to the cloud, because as I mentioned, Radius has very good compartmentalization with environments, and environments can be pre-configured for the developer. So you'll see here in the setup of my repo, there's a bunch of IAC code for setting up the environments, a prod AWS environment and a prod Azure environment. So I can just do a rad deploy app.bicep, and then I will tell it to deploy to my AWS environment. And then I'll do the same thing here in this window, rad app deploy. Sorry, not app, just rad deploy app.bicep. And then I'll specify the Azure environment that my operations team has already pre-configured for me. So it'll take a while to deploy. Once it does, we can take a look at it. So another thing I will show you in the meantime is, sorry for hopping back and forth, but I'm just really excited about this stuff. But I'll show you, like I showed you the app graph for a very simple application. Not too interesting because you just have two components connected to each other. But what if we look at something a little bit more sophisticated? So this is an app that I had deployed previously. And this would be more reflective of a real world application, right? So you have a gateway that fronts the traffic for our front end and the back end. And then you have a message queue that connects with an emailer. And then you have a front end that connects to a UI, a cache that drives the UI, and then the back end hooks up to the database. So all this was generated automatically for me from the application definition I provided. I don't have, and every time I change the application definition and redeploy the app, this app graph gets updated automatically. So it's sort of like a self-documenting application definition. So I don't have to go back and update the diagrams. And in all this time, the AWS and Azure applications have deployed successfully. Let me see if I can change the layout here to make it a little bit easier on the eyes. So you'll see deployed successfully the front-end container in the database. And then what we can show you here to prove that it's not all smoke and mirrors, I can show you rad app graph, which shows the application graph in the console, so the text-based application graph. So the application is called Radius Demo. and then we'll specify the workspace as prod AWS. And then I'm just going to be lazy and do a copy paste here on the Azure side. And boom, you'll see here the application graph in text form. So this is what we had before, and when we used Backstage to build the dashboard so that we could visualize this data. But basically, you'll see the connections. You'll see all the specific, like Kubernetes specific resources that were created on your behalf. So notice that I didn't have to specify, the deployment, service account, the secrets, the role bindings. All this was done on my behalf by Radius. All I needed to do was say that I wanted a container in Radius. And then the connections show, and then also specifically, I wanted to point here resources on the cloud resources specifically. The database differs, right? Like in AWS, we'll use a MemoryDB cluster. In Azure, we have a Azure cache for Redis. So these are, again, these are pre-configured by the operator. So I didn't have to worry about, when I deploy to Azure, I need to define a different database resource than when I deploy to AWS. I use the same exact application definition, and it just deployed different resources because they were pre-configured in these ways in these environments for me. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for the demo. I will stop the screen share and bring back the slides, and then we can talk a little bit about the details on our journey with Backstage and building the features. So give me 1 second. Let me share my screen again. All right. Can you all see the slides again? Okay, perfect. All right, Ryan, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Will. So one of the interesting things that I just want to emphasize as well is, like, we're not end users, we're another open source project. So what was important to us was, well, we're shipping something to our users to use. And we know that a lot of our users have internal development platforms. So like our dashboard, whatever we ship in Radius, is kind of there to get people started. Like, it's not going to be the star of the show for most people, especially if they have an internal developer platform. So mostly this is kind of how this all works. Like, we have some CLI functionality. When Radius gets installed on a Kubernetes cluster, Backstage or our skinned version of Backstage that we call the dashboard is there. There's a couple different ways that users can interact with it. If they do rad run, it'll open a port forward for them. There's also this command rad dashboard to just kind of jump right to it, or it's Kubernetes, so you can kind of do whatever you want. If you want to expose it internally to your users, you can choose to do that by opening it publicly. And then the dashboard sits in the Kubernetes cluster and talks to our API. So it's all sort of self-contained from a user point of view. Can I get the next slide, Will? So this is just showing a different picture, right? Like, if a user wants to host their own Backstage instance and they're still using Radius, like, they can take our plugins and put them in their Backstage instance and talk to UCP. I expect folks that are on this call probably don't need this explained, but we're reusing some slides from an internal presentation we did. Can I get the next slide? So ultimately, this is kind of what we ended up building, because we're both shipping our own kind of instance of Backstage for users, as well as shipping a plugin. So we architected everything here as a front end and a back end plugin. The back end plugin actually just doesn't really do very much right now. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the UI that Will was showing with the app graph and the ability to click and drag is actually its own component library that's separate. We had another project that we were trying to use that with at the time that didn't end up going anywhere. So right now it's only used in our dashboard. So it's kind of the architecture of the things that we ended up creating. And I think we can go to the next slide. So we both have this plugin that we built in, and we're shipping our own kind of themed version of Backstage. And just talking a little bit about the experience of building this, because we're not like front end experts. We're mostly control plane people and back end kind of people. So like something that was great about Backstage was it was awesome to follow the instructions and just get something working. Like I think for a lot of people that don't work very often in the JavaScript ecosystem, it's just frustrating to like get something going. So it was a really good experience to get up and running with Backstage. Also thought it was really easy to theme and change the UI. So like as Will was showing you UI, probably saw a lot of things that look really familiar with you. Like we didn't have to change that much. It wasn't very hard, just changing some colors and providing our own images. And there's a tremendous amount of stuff we were able to reuse from navigation and kind of overall style of the UI to reusing tables and other kinds of components that came built in. So that was a really excellent experience, as well as doing things like it was really easy to add the Kubernetes plugin. We do need to communicate with the Kubernetes API, so we're using the existing Kubernetes plugin proxy functionality to do that, which is great. And it was really easy to add to our existing architecture. I learned on this call earlier that there's now a built-in health check endpoint, and now we're going to start using that because we probably should be as part of this. So those are some of the things that were good. If I sort of think about the cost of building a project like this without something like Backstage to build upon, probably would have been like 3x the cost to get to the point we are with the project. So like that's just a huge win for us, and I think that was awesome. Some things that weren't as great about it, container size is not great. Most of the other components, there's 3 or 4 other components we ship in an install of Radius. Those components are written in Go. Their install size is about 50 megabytes, or their download size is about 50 megabytes because they're Go single binaries. Ended up putting a lot of work in trying to shrink the size, really reduce the amount of plugins we're using. Didn't get as far as I'd like. I'd like to see this, a lot smaller than it is. Eventually I got to the point where I was like trying to rewrite the build system, trying to rewrite the Docker files, and I found some examples of doing a 2-phase build with Backstage. Still feel like there'd be a little bit more juice to squeeze from this, but end up kind of arguing with the JavaScript tooling at the end of the day, which is not something I want to spend a lot of time on. So that's where we are. The concern here from our side is that if this is something we give to every user that's installed by default, it's a big thing for download size and install time. But so far nobody's complained about it. So I guess maybe I'm the only one. I have really bad internet. Some things that I'm not super sure about. We tried building catalog and app graph integration. So something that's kind of interesting about our model is we have like the live state of your application as it was deployed to whatever environment it was deployed to. And it's not a singleton. Like the same app could be deployed to multiple environments. It could be using different infrastructure in those environments, and it could be using different configurations in their environments. And I didn't find a great way to represent that in the catalog. It felt like the catalog wanted to catalog the definition of the app rather than the state of it. So I ended up building a lot of functionality for that. That's why the backend plugin exists. It's disabled right now in the install because I just wasn't sure that it was the right thing. I just wasn't sure that it was a good idea. So we're kind of still in a place of, waiting for somebody to tell us that they really need that. But I think our hope was kind of, well, can we combine the things that people are already using Backstage with the fact that we have a bunch of knowledge about the actual infrastructure that your app is running on and make that experience good to navigate. So that's still out there as a possibility. We didn't find a great way to solve it for now. And I guess you can give me next slide. I think that's the end, right, Will? Yeah, okay, you got one more.
Yeah, it's we just wanted to touch a little bit on future work. So obviously we want to continue to improve the application graph UI. You might notice that it's pretty minimalistic right now. In the future, we want to make it a little bit nicer and add a few more bells and whistles to it. The other thing we want to look at, and perhaps this is something that the Backstage community can tell us whether it's a good idea or not, is we really want to publish this Radius plugin to the Backstage marketplace, because what we also envision is Radius current Backstage adoptees who then bring Radius into their stack can then just enable the Radius plugin, and then they can do all the app graph visualization and all the Radius centric things in their instances of Backstage. And with these users, they won't use the default dashboard that comes with Radius. They would just enable the Radius plugin and go bring it into their own dashboards. So we really want to get this going. And Ryan touched a little bit about application graph and software catalog and whether or not that's a good idea. We want to explore this a little bit further because we think it could be a very complementary kind of feature for the software catalog. We envision a world where you don't have to like go back and catalog your software after it's deployed. The catalog sort of gets built and updated as a part of the deployment workflow that you might have. And then we, in the further future, want to build other plugins to expose other Radius features. The dashboard right now is very much read-only. You can't use it to deploy applications, manage your recipes, or edit anything. So we want to build some additional plugins that will enable you to do that. And then the last one bullet point here is something that a lot of our community actually saw and really want us to push for is interop with other plugins. And the biggest thing that they ask for is, oh, cool, I can see the application graph. What about observability? It'd be really cool to layer on observability on top of the graph for us to be able to see what's going on with our application. So we see a world where like maybe the Radius plugin can interop with other plugins like a Datadog plugin or an Argo CD like dashboarding plugin to be able to overlay some observability stuff on top of the application graph and provide this like really cool experience for the developer. So with that, we'll close out on some resources that you may use to go explore around Radius, and I think you can share these links separately later as well. And then also some additional community resources to take a look at and explore on your own with on the Radius side. So with that, that's the end of our presentation. We'll open it up for any questions if we have time.
Thank you. That's awesome. Happy to see usage of Backstage and the time it saved you. I was about midway through the presentation to ask if the plugins were available standalone as well. You answered that question. That's very nice to see.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's unfortunately still on our to-do list to publish them, but I guess that's pretty small.
You have it in mind, at least. That's, yeah.
Yes.
We do have time for questions if anyone has any. Seeing as the last agenda item for the community session is also Q&A, I think we can open that up at the same time if anyone has general questions about Backstage as well. I could reverse the Q&A a little bit if you want to talk about some of the things you mentioned at the end of the slides when it comes to catalog integration with app graph and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting to talk about because I feel like I've gotten secondhand information from like GitHub issues about this. So basically what I noticed is most of the catalog use cases are cataloging definitions. Like here's where we defined, the app and its components in kind of a static way. And there's a little bit of duplicative functionality in Radius for that. The thing that I think is interesting about our approach that I haven't seen other projects do is because we're deploying all the infrastructure on your behalf and kind of orchestrating everything, we've got a much more comprehensive view of like what is actually the running infrastructure. And so we want to be able to solve problems for people like like if you get a ticket that a metric went bad on a database and you're like, okay, what applications are impacted by this server? Like those are the kinds of questions we want people to be able to answer, or the reverse question, obviously. So it didn't seem, from what I could see with the catalog, when I tried ingesting that data into the catalog, I ended up having to do a lot of like name mangling to get that data to appear in the catalog. Like basically we have this hierarchy of concepts that goes from environments to applications to resources. And it didn't feel super right that I was doing that and putting basically live state in the catalog versus declarations that the user wrote. Is my understanding of that right, that that's not really a purpose for the catalog?
Pretty much spot on. I'd say that it's mainly
Okay.
declarations. Sometimes you'd grab data not from the declaration kind of source of truth itself always, especially if you're ingesting users and groups, that kind of organizational data. There's quite a lot of discussion about environments. I think what I think is interesting and different here is that the good view you have into the state and how different the states are across the deployment targets as well. And if you also want to be looking at that kind of integration where you make it possible to bring in information from other providers, you mentioned, for example, Datadog, being able to see the deployment status of these things that are deployed. That starts getting really tricky if you really want to be able to connect everything in a nice way in the ecosystem. So it is certainly quite interesting to represent them in the catalog in some way.
Yeah.
What's
the so?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. You're fine.
I was going to ask, what's the conversation about environments? I haven't seen that yet.
So that's about having one component, in this case, a source code, deployed to different environments, and I'm sure we can grab the issue. It's in a little bit of a stale state due to there being ideas and some kind of needs of this, but no really concrete implementations and use cases. I think a lot of adopters have kind of solved this themselves in different ways. Ben, do you want to talk a bit?
I've just pinged the environment concept issue. I was just going to say, I think that where it becomes really powerful is resources and being able to catalog those. Because I think from our own experience, like cataloging resources is a pain. Like nobody wants to define like their database in, let's say you use, Terraform or whatever. No one wants to define the database in Terraform and then also create a catalog info file for this, right? And then ingest that into the catalog. So being able to ingest things that maybe don't make up the component definition as such, but make up the things that back it. Maybe it's the, the database or it's the cache or whatever, and being able to ingest those into the catalog and being able to link those to this component. Maybe that's a good use case there. Yeah, I think it's tricky because I was trying to also understand, like, maybe if we were to ingest things from the Radius API, it's kind of like there's a lot more metadata that's provided from the catalog, right? So like ownership, whereas I don't know where that would fit really in the Radius part. So you need maybe like an entity to be able to decorate a little bit more with some more information, what resources are combined with this component that's deployed into these environments, like where's the database, can I see more information about the database, for instance. I think there is definitely a use case for it. I'm just trying to work out where it's best placed and where to get that data. But I think that there is definitely an overlap there and definitely some use to ingesting that state that you have, which is what Patrick mentioned earlier, that state of like what makes up this component, like where is everything?
Is it possible to annotate a component? Like would it be reasonable for us to like attach metadata to components in the catalog so that they could link to our plugin?
Yeah, so that's kind of a common practice today, is that instead of like us storing all the data in the catalog, you basically store a foreign key reference in an annotation, right, and can go look that up in a different service. That's like how a lot of integrations work today. Kubernetes, for instance, and PagerDuty, all that stuff is kind of It's just an annotation which points to a reference in in another system, which we can then go and a plugin can go and hit that upstream service with the foreign key and say, give me some more information about this, right? So there's definitely some parts there we can do. I was thinking more like how we would do this from a catalog processing part, because you'd still want to be able to like, materialize some entities out of this to get ingested to the catalog, these resources, right? So whether you could do something on the processing there when you're processing an entity that's got a radius thing, go and look it up, go and make some more entities. I don't know. I'm sure there's some options there.
I think what kind of melds the worlds fairly well here might be to kind of ingest the slow moving data.
For sure.
Probably as resources in the catalog. So the fact that there is an environment and some metadata around it that you don't expect to change, maybe even daily. And then for the rest of the information, runtime information, then you rely on more APIs that tie the real-time information to the entity. I'm going to link a really old issue here that is closed even, but this is one of the things, one of the lines we thought about. We'll probably do this at some point. There's a lot going on in the project, but a status API, it's kind of tied to entities that you can populate with data from different sources, right? So that's really kind of the runtime state of entities. And that's where you'd be able to plug in Datadog and those other kind of real-time information sources in one end, and then on the other end you can kind of get the location of the resource from the catalog graph and the app graph.
Okay.
I guess one example, just to back that up also, of like things that we kind of advise not to store in the catalog is resources are fine, like databases, they're long-lived, right? But things like running pods that back a service, probably don't really want to store them in a catalog. They're kind of ephemeral. They come and go pretty quickly, scale up, scale down. It's too much fast-moving data for the catalog, really. It doesn't, because the things that are in there, if they're like permalinks, they also disappear. It doesn't really matter then. You can't really find the stuff that you had before, right? Because they disappear so quickly.
Yeah.
I think,
and the things that I think we're mostly aligned with that. Like the things that are in our API are the things that are slow moving, as you would say. Like they would not change without the user triggering a deployment via some mechanism.
Yeah.
So like compared to a pod, like pods come and go, right?
Yeah.
But like
sure.
your database doesn't change unless you delete the app or deploy it.
Yeah. I think it makes sense. I think we're aligned there.
Yep.
Okay.
And
well, I'll check out these issues, see what I can figure out.
Yeah. Nice.
We'll be back.
Cool. Give us a ping. We're always in Discord if you want to chat more.
Great.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks everyone.
So I have a quick question about how Backstage users like leverage the software catalog. Are all your users mainly updating their software catalog like manually out of band, or have some of them like created some automation around it? I'm just curious to see like how to hear how they perhaps use the catalog.
You want to take this, Patrick, or should I?
Yeah. Well, yeah. You can start.
I think the answer to this is it depends. I don't think there is a silver bullet for every company. I think depending on where you are in your like organization in terms of tracking software components, I think it differs. A lot of companies have some system in place already, which has some index. Maybe it's an Excel spreadsheet, or maybe it's a little bit more, well-defined than that. Maybe it's an API that they already have some metadata that they can ingest into the catalog. Some people are starting from scratch. So some people go and create these catalog info files and go and document the components like manually. Some people choose to generate them. Like there's a lot of different ways to get data into the catalog, not just catalog info files. You can also, create your own providers, which can go and hit some of the data source, like the Excel spreadsheet, for instance, and go and create these entities for you. So I think the answer is it depends. There is no real one way. I mean, we recommend people using catalog info files because it's something that's worked internally for us at Spotify, like having, some metadata defined alongside your component in code with you. That's kind of one thing we recommend. But I think when we started the catalog, that was kind of like the only way to get data in, and then realized, hey, people don't just do this. So we have to come up with other methods to get data into the catalog. So yeah, I think it depends.
Okay, cool. I'll definitely take a look at the other methods and explore that a little bit.
Yeah. Do you have anything else, Patrick, or did I go with that?
No, I think that covers it. Like people do all kinds of different things based on where they came from. It's always very nice if you have an existing source or a good source of data just based on how you develop software in your organization that you can ingest from. But all of the above. All right. If there are no more questions, either for the Radius team or the Backstage team, I am going to close this community session.